day. I am Gienen Hernandez from BSTM 1101 and I'm going to discuss on how to eliminate risk and hazard in tourism and hospitality management. First, I'm going to discuss on what is the difference and what is the meaning of risk and hazard.
Risk and hazard. Risk is a situation involving exposure to danger. It is often defined as the unexpected variability or volatility of return and thus includes both potential worse than expected as well as better than expected returns. Hazard is anything that can cause harm. Example, chemical, electricity, ladders, and it is something that has the potential to harm you. Hazard control. Workplace procedures adapted to minimize injury, reduce adverse health effects, and control damage to plant or equipment. Controls are usually placed most effective to least effective. Like for example, the first one is at the source, the second is along the path, and third is at the worker. 5 steps in risk management process. Step 1. Identify the risk. The first step is to identify the risk that the business is exposed to in its operating environment. There are many different types of risk: legal risk, environmental risk, market risk, regulatory risk, and many more. It is important to identify as many of these risk factors as possible. In a manual environment, these risks are noted down manually. If the organization has a risk management solution employed, all this information is inserted directly into the system. The advantage of this approach is that these risks are now visible to every stakeholder in the organization with access to the system. Instead of this vital information being locked away in a report which has to be requested via email, anyone who wants to see which risks have been identified can access the information in the risk management system. Step 2. Analyze the risk. Once a risk has been identified, it needs to be analyzed. The scope of the risk must be determined. It is also important to understand the link between the risk and different factors within the organization. To determine the severity and seriousness of the risk, it is necessary to see how many business functions the risk affects. There are risks that can bring the whole business to a standstill if actualized, while there are risks that will only be minor inconveniences in analyzed. In a manual risk management environment, this analysis must be done manually. When a risk management solution is implemented, one of the most important basic steps is to map risk to different documents, policies, procedures, and business processes. This means that the system will already have a map risk framework that will evaluate risk and let you know the far-reaching effects of each risk. Step 3. Evaluate or rank the risk. Risks needed to be ranked and prioritized. Most risk management solutions have different categories of risk. Depending on the severity of the risk, a risk that may cause some inconvenience is rated lowly. Risks that can result catastrophic loss are rated the highest. It is important to rank risk because it allows the organization to gain a holistic view of the risk exposure of the whole organization. The business may be vulnerable to several low-level risks, but it not require upper management interventions. On the other hand, just one of the highest rated risks is enough to require immediate intervention. Step 4. Treat the risk. Every risk needs to be eliminated or contained as much as possible. This is done by connecting with the experts of the field to which the risk belongs to. In a manual environment, this entails contacting each and every stakeholder and then setting up meetings so everyone can talk and discuss the issues. The problem is that the discussion is broken into many different email threads across the different documents and spreadsheets and many different phone calls. In a risk management solution, all the relevant stakeholders can be sent notification from within the system. The discussion regarding the risk and its possible solution can take place from within the system. Upper management can also keep a close eye on the solution being suggested and the process being made from within the system. Instead, everyone contacting each other to get updates. Everyone can get updates directly from within the risk management solution. Step 5. Monitor and review the risk. Not all risks can be eliminated. Some risks are always present. Market risk and environmental risk are just two examples of risk that always needed to be monitored. Under manual system, monitoring happens through diligent employees. This professional must make sure that they keep a close watch on all risk factors. Under a digital environment, the risk management system monitors the entire risk framework of the organization. If any factor or risk changes, it is immediately visible to everyone. Computers are also much better at continuously monitoring risk than people. Monitoring risk also allows your business to ensure continuity. Hierarchy of controls. Here are the hierarchy of controls. First is the elimination, which means physically remove the hazard. Next is the substitution, which replace the hazards. Next is engineering controls, which means isolate people from the hazards. Next is administrative controls, which change the way people work. And next is the personal protective equipment. Elimination and substitution. While most effective at reducing hazards, also tend to be the most difficult to implement in an existing process. If the process is still at the design or development stage, elimination and substitution of hazards may be inexpensive and simple to implement. For an existing process, major change in equipment and procedures may be required to eliminate or substitute for a hazard. Engineering controls. Engineering controls are favored over administrative and personal protective equipment or PPE for controlling existing worker exposure in the workplace because they are designed to remove the hazard at the source before it comes in contact with the worker. Well-designed engineering controls can be highly effective in protecting workers and will typically be independent of worker interactions to provide this high level of protection. The initial cost of engineering controls can be higher than the cost of administrative controls or PPE, but over the longer term, operating costs are frequently lower and in some instances can provide a cost saving in other areas of processes. And the last is administrative controls and PPE. Administrative controls and PPE are frequently used with existing processes where hazards are not particularly well controlled. Administrative controls and PPE programs may be relatively inexpensive to establish but over the long term can be very costly to sustain. These methods for protecting workers have also proven to be less effective than other measures, requiring significant effort by the affected workers. 6 main categories of hazards. First is biological hazard. Biological hazard includes viruses, bacteria, insects, animals, etc. that can cause adverse health impacts. For examples, molds, bloods, and other bodily fluids, harmful plants, sewage, dust, and vermin. Next is chemical hazards. Chemical hazards are hazardous substances that can cause harm. These hazards can result in both health and physical impacts, such as skin irritation, respiratory system irritation, blindness, corrosion, and explosion. Third is physical hazards. Physical hazards are environmental factors that can harm an employee without necessarily touching them. Includes height, noise, radiation, and pressure. Ergonomic hazards. Ergonomic hazards are a result of physical factors that can result in musculoskeletal injuries. For examples, a poor workstation setup in an office, poor posture, and manual handling. Psychosocial. Psychosocial hazards includes those that can have an adverse effect on an employee's mental health or well-being. For example, sexual harassment, victimization, stress, and workplace violence. Safety. Safety are the hazards that creates unsafe working conditions. For example, exposed wires or a damaged carpet might result in a tripping hazards. These are sometimes included under the category of physical hazards. Steps in a hazard control program. Just like the risk, hazard also have steps in controlling hazard, which are Step 1. Identify the hazard. Step 2. Assess the risk. Step 3. Choose the best control for the hazard. Step 4. Implement the chosen control. Step 5. Evaluate the effectiveness of the control.
That's all on how to eliminate risk and hazard in hospitality management. I hope you learned something